And this is very inspiring because, as I wrote here in the title already, you have two, I call it stylistic principles that are antagonistic. That means they stand against each other. So antagonistic means like black and white, or like bright and dark, or or cold and warm. So they are just the opposite. That means antagonistic. And in the south of the area, we develop something called the labyrinth. It's really the word labyrinth, like the maze, comes from that. And the other one is called the megaron. And actually, what happens then in that, you see slide 2 now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What happens then to that area politically will have a big decision on the whole architecture of Europe. So this map you have seen already. Today I talk about the dark green circle, so the one kind of in the middle of the map. And it's also the bar in the middle of the timeline. So it starts roughly between 2600 before Christ, and again it doesn't go continuously, so it's interrupted and this and that, and then it actually the culture on the island on Crete get extincted around 1150 before Christ. So this is the dark green bar, and also the circle, the one in the middle. So kind of that marks the island. The island is called Crete. And to zoom in again, so we have these kind of three high cultures parallel. About the left one I spoke last time, Mesopotamia. The Egyptian one will be, the blue bar will be the second lecture today. That's more continuous. And the Aegean culture is actually not a continuous big empire like the Egyptian was. The Egyptian was kind of an empire. And the Aegean is more like loose cities that actually develop interesting architecture. So do you see the map already? I mean, page 4?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I have to apologize. Sometimes you see the German descriptions because I have to use again some scan. I scan my German architecture book, which is great because the only source I find where we have the drawings so greatly. And wherever I can, I put pictures. Today there will be more pictures that actually I found on the internet, but they describe the same buildings and places. So to use some drawings and 2D plans, I have to use those that you see, and they have sometimes German descriptions, but actually in English they're quite the same. And I wrote additionally in English mostly what you see. So let's look on the left hand of the paper first. You see a map, right? And this is where I zoom into the dark green circle, and this is where today Greece is. So the country Greece. And you also see Athens. This is the capital, and that's kind of within the red circle, right? And the two upper circles, the red and the green, we can count together. It's they call it in English the Mycenaean architecture. I like to pronounce it Mycenaean because actually in Greece they call it Mycenae, so with a K, not with a C. Although sometimes American people say Mycenaean, but actually Mycenaean, the Greek call it Mycenaean, not Mycenaean. So, and the word comes from the Greek, of course. So, and they have two different stylistic principles. The north, so the two circles in the north, the green and the red, we can see together, as you see in the graphic on the bottom right side of the page. They develop something called the megaron. And the more interesting architecture where I will focus on in the lecture is in the blue circle. I hope you can see the blue that circles the very southern island, Crete. So that's just that island, and it's called the Minoan architecture. So the style or the culture is called Minoan architecture that you see on the top. They developed the labyrinth, and this is really just on that island. And the most important area is Knossos. You see maybe on the map. Maybe you can read it. So they really develop a unique architecture. This is also unique until today. So no one has ever copied it or went back to that. The Greek culture from the north is copied a lot, as you know. I mean, maybe you know, even like the current American architecture, the White House and the Pentagon, all refers to the Greek architecture from the north. But the south, I don't know, it's kind of extinct. It got indeed extincted, probably by eruption of a volcano in 1150. So these are the two principles that I will talk about in my first lecture, and I will focus on that because it's so important for how we can design architecture. So on the right side, we see actually what became then the standard also nowadays. And so the right side is on the north, right? And that culture survived. So this developed then later to the Greek temple and then to Rome, and from Rome to Europe. So in Europe and also in Thailand, currently we think architecture right on the right side, which is a megaron. That means it's basically a house as a box. So it's basically, you think architecture, the space from the outside. So you kind of, I explained last time, there was a way from roundish to rectangular architecture. So this is already, this process has already happened on the right side. So this is a rectangular box, and you draw this box and you divide it into rooms inside as much as you can. And as you see there, they take it very literally. So all the divisions of the rooms are sequentially from the front. So you enter here, not from the side, like in Mesopotamian architecture, you enter here from the front, which is like a development. But the rooms then develop mostly one, sequentially from the front to the back of that megaron. And when you want more rooms, you cannot make it longer. So it's a bit naive, but it's the house as a box. Whilst on the left side, you see the Minoan architecture on Creta. This was really only on the island Creta. The island still exists, but the architecture has died. But we can find it in the ruins, so we can dig for it and found how it looked like. They developed the labyrinth, so they think space totally different. They think it as a fluid space. So they add one room and add another and add another, and it becomes like a texture. You see that, so the houses have actually no shapes to the outside. Of course, they kind of have an appearance, but the appearance is not planned. So there are some courtyards in between, and then it's really like labyrinthic structure. And they also have the doors on the corners, as you can see. So there's a totally different way of thinking space. And the graphic that I put here on the first slide is a bit chaotic, but actually I find this a very great space to organize also private houses. That's why your task today will go back to these two principles. You have to design or sketch a small house for, let's say, two people, like the right principle, and one time on the left principle, to put that against each other. So, and the left one I find very inspiring because you can actually develop great, also you could develop great contemporary houses. I did that a few times. I mean, I designed one or two, and one was actually realized in Hamburg. So it's a courtyard house, and it goes back to the left principle. So this is how I start with the stylistic, so how it looks like, and then I explain that more, the labyrinthic house. So I will focus on the Minoan architecture on the island Creta, which is on the left side, because it has more to say about, and it's really interesting. And the right side is not so important, and we will cover that anyway in the later Greek architecture, which comes next Friday. So that's the later Greek architecture. So on the left side, we see the stylistic elements, and the interesting one is already the conic column, which is kind of inverted. So normally columns always are, I mean, everywhere else in the world, and most of the other times, they are big at the bottom and then become slimmer to the top of the column. So you see on the left side, the column here is inverted. It's big on the top side and small at the bottom. So that's very untypical, and it's also, and we call it antectonic. So tectonic means when you display the forces that are in an architectural element, you display it and make it visible to the outside. You make it able to see. And this is kind of the opposite. I mean, so, and we don't know why they did it, but I find it quite beautiful and interesting. And then they added this kind of ornament that you see on the left side. So this was just over it. This has nothing to do with the construction, but they just carved it in or painted it on it. So that's the ornament. And on the right side, you see they use these kind of big blocks, and it's a bit rough and not so developed. That's on the mainland Greek, where today Athens is, and the mainland. And then they actually copied the ornament from the Minoan. So they were in contact, of course. They were not one empire, but they had trading relationships. So they know about each other. And actually then the Mycenaean architecture, first they built like on the left picture, like very rough. Then the right side is also in the north, but newer. And they copied actually the decoration elements, including these upper. It should be the horn of the Taurus. It symbolized the horn of the Taurus. They copied that from the Minoan and added it on their architecture. So they didn't develop their own decoration system. And so the Minoan architecture, the main finding that we have is the Palace of Knossos, as you see in the reconstruction. So of course it doesn't look like that today, but we think it might have looked like that. And this one doesn't have a representative facade because it's also a big labyrinth. It has the same principles like the normal houses, the city, but it's a normal labyrinth, and it actually eventually meet courtyards and meet the outside. So and then they make a facade, so that you see it looks representative, but it's actually not designed from the facade. It's just where the house ends, and they make it look nice. So they add the balconies and the columns and the decoration, but actually it's not a designed facade. It's just where the building meets reality, let's say, meets the outside city. And they developed also something called a megaron, but there the megaron has a different meaning. That's what you see on the right side. It's actually the fluid space. So the non-defined space, as you build it in the model with Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona pavilion. People always said he and Mies van der Rohe, the architect, invented the fluid space, so the not defined space, in the 1920s. But as you can see on the right side, he didn't. It was there already 5,000 or 4,000 years before him, but it has become kind of forgotten. So the Minoan thought space as moving from one room to another continuously, and as you can see in this building there, which in that room, it's called the Megaron 2. It's in the king apartment in that palace that you see on the left. It even doesn't have walls, so it's really just like it marks the space by very big columns, and this was kind of his main living room that you look inside, and it continuously flows over into first another gallery and then in a courtyard. So in the back you see a courtyard, light comes from the top, and there's another space in between, and then this kind of courtyard. So it's not space as a defined, ending volume. It's space as a, as I said, as fluid. It's continuous. It's not defined. It doesn't have an end. It's endless kind of. So and this was already there 3,000 years ago, and so it was not invented by the 20th century, although many historians say that comes from the 20th century. But 20th century kind of took that. I don't know if they knew about Minoan architecture, but at least it comes again from there. So this what we see is how it might have looked like. The problem is, of course, this is not preserved in that well state. This is a partly reconstruction. So that means all we see is reconstructed, but we call it partly reconstruction because, as you see, it's not completed. They intentionally reconstructed it in the 19th century, so it looks like a ruin, but actually it's built new, what you see there. And so this picture is good for you to get an impression how actually it might have looked like. So on the one hand, it's good because we see how it might have looked like, kind of colorful painted with the inverted columns and something like an architrave already on top. That's the top part, these kind of the yellow and the white circle together. It's called architrave, so this kind of on top, the big beam, let's say. But a very naive way of designing it. So, but now the other problem is, because of the reconstruction, so here you get more impressions, that it's actually reconstructed on the site, in situ. So the funny thing is, all these stuff that I'm talking about is discovered by archaeologists, right? I don't know if you know that profession. Archaeologists came up in the 19th century, so 1800 something. People found interest in that old stuff, let's say, and they went to Egypt. That's the most famous archaeological site, Egypt, and where I showed you the pictures last time, Mesopotamia, and actually research about our origins of culture. So we didn't know it before 1800, let's say. We would just focus on our own, and we know Greek culture because it was kind of, it never really died, so the buildings are still there. But these old stuff were hidden by earth. So it was hidden by earth over the centuries, and and then people actually went there and started digging where they assumed that buildings are. Sometimes there are no buildings, so you just dig in the ground, find nothing. And then it became kind of not a profession, but more a hobby, kind of rich or educated people to went to Egypt or to Crete, and where they assumed there might have been cities, they start digging in the earth, in the ground, and remove the earth. And they actually found then something like this. So more like on the right side. So the left right is already quite clean. I assume some reconstruction happened, but the right side is like how you found it. It's like rough, and then you have to kind of think how it might have looked like. So, and it started in the 19th century Now the problem is, in Creta it looks now like this. Why? Because it was not, today everything is regulated, right, by government regulations, and there's even a UNESCO World Heritage Organization to protect these areas. And that time in Creta, it just happened that a guy called Arthur Evans, I will show you soon, he just bought that area, and it was his land, and he can do whatever he wants. So he started digging, and he was interested how it really looked like. But then he reconstructed it in the way as you can see there, and he did it in situ. So he found these places, that means on the side, in situ means on the side, and he actually rebuilt as he imagined or as he thought it might have looked like. He rebuilt it on the site, which is really problematic because he destroys the evidence. So that's the guy. And something on the right is he found. So this was known to be in the great, I mean, that's the area where we know now the big palace has been of Knossos. And that guy, I mean, he bought the land and he just, yeah, nowadays you wouldn't do that anymore. You will preserve it as it was. But he found it and thought how it looked like, and then actually made it from the right to the left. So that's the same room. And the right side, I think, is also some reconstruction happened already. So the floor is new. I don't believe the chair was so sharp. I think it's kind of maybe new. And then he made it look like on the left. So he kind of rebuilt parts of the palace, just part, not everywhere. And by that, actually destroy the evidence. So we can't go there anymore and find how it looked like because he built over it already. And he even used like concrete and new stuff. So it made a big drama that time. I mean, a lot of people complain because archaeology came up as a science already. And he was just kind of sophisticated, but mainly a rich British who has nothing to do and want to find about the old culture. So a little bit. So he reconstructed in place. Here I wrote it down. In situ mean on the site. So you wouldn't do that nowadays anymore because it's really problematic. But so on the one hand, you have these pictures, so you can imagine how it looked like. But on the other hand, on the right side, you see the concrete ceiling already. We are not very sure if it really has looked like that. So now tourists go there and see, well, looks good, but actually we don't know if it really looked like that, but probably something like that. So we can assume it from sometime also from drawings, or there's something, not on paper, but there's something painted on vases, like objects, or it's carved in stone, or sometimes carved as a model. We even find a model, I'll show you soon, a model how houses may look like. Okay, so this was the pictures from the palace, how it looks now in Knossos. And now shortly about urban design is not so much to say, because it's not interesting, it's not so developed in my opinion. The shape of the circle is, the shape of the city is a bit like an irregular circle on the left. That's Knossos, and it works like the palace is in the middle, and then big roads lead toward the palace. So I think urban design is not so interesting there. This is more interesting, that's what I said. This is should be real model. They kind of added the wooden elements on the top, but maybe it's a copy, but they found a real model like this, a model of a house in the city, so we can assume how they look like. And these pictures on the bottom, they are painted, but they are painted after like small plates they found, like clay plates 1 centimeter thick. They found them that represent actually the houses in the city. So the facades were probably decorated somehow like this. So that's one example how we can reconstruct how it looked like from kind of a model like upstairs, like on the top of the page. And so, and the rooms, as I said, are like fluid. So on the top you see an oval house again, as it was, as I explained last time, kind of everywhere before the shape turned to rectangle. And here it's organized around the courtyard already. So the courtyard is in the middle, and the rooms kind of are a bit like rectangular, a bit radial, but the house is oval. And then it also turned to rectangular houses, like you see there in Basiliki, or on the right side, the representative ones. So they are organized from the inside to the outside, you could say. So they are not planned from outside to inside, basically. And the palaces, I make this one a bit shorter because not so interesting. They became quite huge and have the same principle as I said, like the houses. So they don't have a representative facade. As you can see on the left, it looks a bit like, from the front, it looks a bit like a factory. The only representative element is the column, the row of columns that you see facing the courtyard, but the courtyard is also inside. So the facades to the courtyard are even nicer than to the outside. So outside they really didn't make a big effort, which is very untypical for palace, right? King palace. So they usually Later times they did it the opposite. They designed outside greatly, and inside is number 2. Of course, they made it nice too, but first the facade. And here they really develop it from the inside to the outside. So the organization of the rooms is important, and the facade kind of just happened there. And here's another reconstruction of what you've seen before. This is now the Palace of Knossos. I wrote what you see always on the top right side of the page, right? So Palace of Knossos. So this with this I'm more happy. These are like real reconstruction on the computer. So of course you can do anything, then you don't destroy anything. So on the right side on the painting. So now we go to the Palace of Knossos, which is the most important finding, and at the same time the one that is partly destroyed because you reconstructed on the side. So on the top right side I always write a name, and then you see a drawing. On the right side a painting, on the left side a computer model, how the palace might have looked like. Here's a bigger, this is kind of a bit famous, so we find a lot of these paintings and postcards on the internet. If you type Palace of Knossos, and this is the reconstruction. So the left side is the ground floor. This we can mostly find because we remove the earth, what archaeologists do, and we find that. So we find the walls, the base walls, and then, but the right side shows the upper floor, which is on top of the left, as you can assume. And the problem is that, of course, for these are no evidences, but we can from part evidences or sometimes from like pictures painted on like any kind of vases or plates, reconstruct how it might have looked like. So the right side is not very sure, the left side is kind of sure. So, but the left side is not so interesting. What do we see? We see the gray ones on the bottom where 17 is just like magazines for storage. And the red one is a spiritual area, so this kind of representative area with partly like temple rooms. I mean, it's not a temple, it's inside the Grand Palace, but it's for representation. And the blue one is usually for living, so in all these drawings. Red is always sacred, yellow is courtyard, gray is not important, and blue is living room. So if you go to the right side on the first floor, on the second floor, it's actually more interesting because it's these kind of big labyrinths. So to the outside, the facade is not so developed, but on the inside, it's spaces that go into each other, right? So it's not not boxes. And this is the king apartments, or the private one. This is more on the east, and this is, so the other one was for representative living, so where he officially lives, and this is private ones. And on the right side you see that one that I've showed you already, and this is number 1 on the left floor plan. So on the right side you see the number 1. So this is his kind of his main living room, and it's not a closed box, it has just one closed side, and it actually moves from, you see the courtyard on this on the lower part, from the courtyard into a medium room where you can also come inside from number 6, then to the 1, and that's open to that L-shaped gallery, and again to a courtyard. So it's one space goes into the other, and it's not closed. And the number 2 is a smaller version. That's for the queen. She usually gets a smaller apartment next to the king everywhere in the history until modern times. The queen apartment is usually a bit smaller and next to the king's ones. Yeah, you see a section model. Again, it's like, wow, we thought how it might have looked like. And another impression, similar what we've seen before. And the interesting one again, so this facade is the most representative corner to the courtyard. What I forgot to say, these fluent rooms, so they even have the doors and the corners for the normal living house. I forgot to mention before. So the doors and the corners to actually keep the room free. So again, this is a very modern element, how the room is created as a sequence of, yeah, fluid space. So continuous room sequences. More impression, a bit romantic. The 19th century loved to do everything romantic, so that's why they probably rebuild it so tourists can go. Then also beautiful. So that's why they rebuild it there. So now we come to the second part, the Mycenaean architecture. I wrote it on the top left. So now new topic. That's the red circle, and the green circle is called the Trojan circle, the green one. But actually we can see it together as one. The architecture was similar, but the blue one was different, as I explained. So the blue circle I just completed, Creta. Now we go to the top side of the map, red and green. It looked like, for example, on the right. So they developed the megaron. And as I said, Creta, the island on the south, eventually died. So around 1,150. People are not sure. Does that tell now why it died? So probably a volcano erupted next to the island in the ocean, so not on the island, but it make the island be, how you say, the dust, the, how you call that again? I forgot. Well, when you burn fire, and the ashes. So the ashes in the earth, in the sky, probably made that there's not enough sunlight on the earth, and actually the harvest was dying, so they couldn't grow corn, and they didn't have to eat, and they basically starved. So the culture died by starving of the population, and some of them maybe moved away. They didn't want to starve. So that's why the culture around 1,150 before Christ, the Minoan culture really kind of died and it extincted. The second theory is because we haven't found on Creta any walls to save, for example, the palace. The palace is open, as you could see on these drawings. It doesn't have a wall surrounding, which is very untypical for a king palace. So everyone could go there and invade it, and it's the main political center, right? So still no one knows why there's no wall. Not just this palace, also the other palaces had no walls to protect them. And we don't know why. We really don't know why. Because everyone could go there and invade the political core of the city. But all the other cultures know about it. So they had tradings. They went there every day. So they, not every day, but they know how it looked like. So it was not secret. So the second theory is that actually finally someone invaded Creta, maybe the Mycenaean, and destroyed and beated them. But that's just plan B. So the most common theory, plan A, I call it version 1. Version A is that it was died by a volcano eruption, what made the harvest die, so no more food. So on the north side they survived, and if you see as you see on the right plan, that's Troy or Troia, how the Americans say Troy, and Greeks say Troia. Yeah, there you see a bit. I find this version a bit naive, so I'm more in favor of the Minoan version, how they build space. So this fluid space, this continuous space. It's more intelligent. You can actually add more rooms, and as you see in 20th century, we do that again. This kind of continuous space, for example, Mies van der Rohe, but also other examples then in the modern times followed Mies van der Rohe. But still, most of the times of most of the periods of architecture after that period followed the right principle that you see on Troy, which is the megaron. So which is the house as a box. You see when you look on the floor plan of the center of Troy, on the right, you see different rectangles just placed next to each other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 2 red ones, right? And then 3 blue. And they're just like all parallel. And another number 5 is the entrance, another megaron, connect to the wall. So this is the inner circle of the city. And I find it a bit naive. So I find it a bit pity that actually all the architecture, like the Greek high culture, developed over the megaron principle, which is the rectangular house, which is thought from the outside to the inside, and not like the Minoan architecture from inside out. So in the cities start to develop on what they call the acropolis. So you see on the right side, my headline is acropolis. Now the acropolis in Greece is famous in Athens because the temples are built on it, like the Parthenon. But actually it means like a fortress, like the inner core of the city is a fortress with very strong walls that you see on this is the yellow area on the right. And there are the temples and the king buildings and administration buildings. So just the most important ones there, and they're usually on top of hills, as you see on the lower graphic. And then the city actually developed around it. So the city developed around it, and sometimes get another wall, like you see on Troy. There's another second wall, which is white. So if enemies invaded the first wall, they could destroy where the normal people live, but then they actually could flee into the main one. So this was like a refugee fortress. You know what a fortress is, right? Like a castle, like a fort. So you could close the main one, and all people are then for a short time in the first one until the enemy is beaten, or maybe not beaten. So it's like a refuge for safety, like to flee there into case of war. So in the Acropolis, that's why it's not so big. But so that's what Acropolis means. It's kind of a fortress on the peak of a hill, which is usually the center of administration for the cities that then developed around that fortress. So, and Troy is very famous. Why is Troy famous? That's on the right, on the green circle, by the way. But as I said, the design principles are the same. So first this slide. Yeah. So here you can see it better. So this is another city. This is Turin's, the fortress on a hill, and yeah, it's not. I mean, it's very a bit random, I find. So on the left side you see how random it is, but on the right side you see the principles of the megaron here are a bit combined with the courtyard principles from the Minoan. But number 5 is the main one. So this is and the 7s are other megarons. As you can see, 5 is the big one, and then 777 is just parallel to the others. Same like here in Troy. So I find it a bit silly, but that's how they thought of space, as boxes, box, and it's yeah. And this is kind of the king apartment there on the right side. And this is a reconstruction. So this is how these kind of megarons looked like. They were higher. They had a roof, which has an orientation, so it's axial. So it looks already a bit like a Greek temple, right? Especially on the right, when they assume already it might have these kind of triglyphen, this kind of beam decoration, the architrave, how it developed later. But they placed the Minoan inverted columns because they didn't have their own decoration. As I said, they steal the style from the Minoans, probably also the inverted column, but it's like a house, like as I said, you see already it looks like a house, right? And connected with walls, same as the courtyard principle from the Minoan. So they copied it a bit, but the main element is the megaron, the house, the box. So why is Troy famous? Going to Troy. On the right side, on the top, you see the spelling. So Troia is the Greek spelling, and Troy is how the Americans call it. The same floor plan of the city you see there. And you see on the right side, Troy had many periods. Troy 1 until 8. So it lived long. And then actually, people, interesting enough, they forgot where it is. So until 19th century, we didn't know if Troy actually really exists, or if it's just a tale. Why it's a tale? You see on the left side the big horse, right? Do you know about that story? They had have some Hollywood movies about it. Have you seen one? Maybe. Yeah. Okay. The movie is about this horse, right? Do you know about that?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. And this story comes from maybe it's on my next slide. No, it's on the slide after. Okay, it comes from yeah. Did I show that slide first? So it comes from Homer. On the left side, you see his picture, his sculpture, Homer, or maybe how you say in English they call it Homer. That's why Homer Simpson, actually, the main character from The Simpsons, the name goes back to that guy that you see there. But it's a bit like parody because Homer Simpson is not so smart, right? And Homer, actually, the one on the left side, is known to be the first writer or poet. So he wrote the first texts that are non-religious. So the first fictional text. I mean, the first texts we have preserved are religious, like from India and part of the Bible. But these are the first fiction tales. And there are basically 2 books. One is called the Odyssey. This is the travel of Odysseus in the sea, in the Aegean Sea, actually, that you could see on the map. And the other one is the story about Troy. So, and the book is called Ilias, and Ilias, how the Greeks say, Ilias, and it's about the fights of the defense of the city Troy. So when we go back to that slide, the movie is the famous part of the book. The book described the part where the city actually invaded by the wooden horse. So the enemies put an army inside the wooden horse and gave it a gift. They opened the door, left it there overnight, and then in the night the soldiers came out of the wooden horse and opened the door. So that's the story, and they made movies about it. And still, to be honest, it's not sure that the city on the right side is actually really Troy, because it was the historical city, as we found there, had many phases and episodes, as you can see on the right side. And then it was really forgotten where it is. We didn't know where it was. And then, this was my next slide, that guy, Schliemann, it's a German, he went actually, Heinrich Schliemann, to find it. And it took a long time, somewhere in the end of the 19th century, to find the location where he think it is. And he again bought the land, bought the area. But that time he had to talk with the Turkish government already, so it was a bit more developed, like on Creta, and get the permission to digging, and he did, and he found walls, and he found something. He said, I found Troy. I found Troia. So the mystic city, and still nowadays don't know what is. I mean, we know the story, the Ilias, but we also don't know if that Homer was real, if he was maybe just a fiction name of another group of writers. Same like with Shakespeare, we also don't know if Shakespeare existed as a person. And the Homer, we actually don't know if he existed, but we know the story with the wooden horse, and we still don't know if that what you see on the left side is what he found, is actually the real Troy, the historian one or not. But now we assume it might be. But if it's the real one with the horse or not, so here you see they make a big, make the story about it. The horse or not, the evidence is there. So what you see there is if it was the traditional Troia or not, we assume yes. What we found there, what you see on the plan is evidences. So the yellow circle is what you've seen on my reconstructed plan from before. And then actually in different times, as you can see on the right side, they built things on top. So the yellow is the early Troy. Then there was another one later, the red one. And even the classic times, there was a blue, the temple on top. And then everything was destroyed and there was nothing left. So it's actually on the west side of where today Turkey is. There was the green circle before, right? That's now Turkey, opposite Greece. And that's I marked the position of Troy. And we assume, it might have been the real Troia. So where actually the Ilias take place, but we are not sure. But important for us is the architecture. So that this is these kind of megarons, these closed houses. And to summarize that, I find this, as I said, this lecture is a bit shorter, but I find especially the first part important, the Minoan architecture, because it's a way of thinking space that is new in that time. Not totally new, but that was kind of very different to what then became our Western culture of architecture, and actually then worldwide the architecture. On the right side, you see the Mycenaean megaron, the house as a box. And this then was developed to the Greek temple, and the Greek temple was actually when you build a house now in Europe, you build a box like on the right side. Why? Because this culture survived, and the left culture is actually more interesting, in my opinion. This is this kind of labyrinth. Let's call it labyrinth. Another word for maze. And it looks like on the reconstruction on the left, maybe, but it's interesting first for the decoration with the inverted columns, and mainly because this kind of fluid space, the continuous non-defined space, which then actually was reinvented, for example, by Mies van der Rohe in the 20th century. So the modern architecture had its ancestor there. And I find it very inspiring to see these two principles next to each other.